That's us live now.
Okay then, folks. Can we first of all deal with any apologies or substitutions?
No apologies, convener.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Yes,
No,
convener. Item 3, report 29120, a council appointed director of Angus Alive. Obviously, I will participate and vote if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Duff.
Thank you. Yep. Item. Yep. Are you hearing me? I'm unmuted.
Yes, I'm fine. Yes.
Good. Item 3, report number 29120. I'm a council appointed member of the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership, and a specific dispensation for that. So I'll stay in. It's non-financial, and I'll vote.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
As convener, the same as Councillor Duff. I won't go through that again.
Okay, thank you. So I saw Councillor Brown.
Same as Councillor Duff and Councillor Devine.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? All right, let's move on to report item number 3, report 29120. The report itself is covered on pages 3 to 6. Anybody wish to speak on anything on pages 3 to 6? No. Right then, the audit draft report starts on page 7 and continues to page 14. Anything on pages 7 to 14?
Yes, thank you, Councillor King. It's Gillian Woolman here, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to present Appendix A, which is the annual audit report on Angus Council.
Yes, but that's
okay.
That's page 53, isn't it? Gillian? That's about page 53, isn't it?
So no, I'm looking at the earlier one.
Do you have a page number?
So I'm unmuted.
Do you have a page number in the top right-hand corner of your screen?
No, I do not.
That page 7.
So I am after the cover paper by Ian Lorimer. Right, okay. So if Ian would care to.
Yes, this is the report we're talking about.
Us in.
Carry on, please. Carry on, Gillian. This is
Thanks,
the one.
Councillor King. Great, and I hope you can hear me clearly. So we've reached the conclusion of the audit, and I'm turning my attention now to page 4 of my report, which has key messages at the top of it. The key messages cover the accounts, financial management, financial sustainability, governance and transparency, and best value. And I commend you to share those key messages with the full council. They would have an interest in all of them at the conclusion of the 1920 audit. But given this is the Scrutiny and Audit Committee, I propose to go into the body of my report, which is the source of those key messages. And also, I think members will remember, I like to just for us to tune in to the amounts of money that are flowing through your accounts. So our audit related to auditing your expenditure for the year 1920, and that's about £440 million you now spend to provide services in Angus. And when you look at the balance sheet of the accounts, you see you now have assets of just under £1 billion, so £950 million. So I'm just setting the context there for the work. So on page 6 of my report, we've got the introduction, and members of this committee will be familiar with this. It links up with the annual audit plan that we presented earlier in the year. Of course, the big step change is paragraph 4 in my report on page 7, which relates to the fact that just at the year end, the global pandemic started. Big implications for you for the provision of services, but also implications for the preparation of the accounts and for our audit work. And we elaborate further on that later on in the report. So I'm turning my attention now to part 1, which is on page 9 of my report, and this relates to the financial statements or the annual accounts themselves. And the main judgment there is that we're proposing an unmodified audit opinion. And in old language, you'll be familiar with the term an unqualified audit opinion. And that's exactly the type of opinion you would wish to have at the end of the audit. The second main judgment we refer to there is, exceptionally this year, there's an emphasis of matter paragraph. And this is saying to a user of the accounts that this year there's less certainty about the value of land and property. Angus Council is not alone in this regard. Your valuer has used the guidance that's been issued nationally by RICS, which has given that guidance to all valuers this year. And it does not detract from the fact that you've got an unmodified audit opinion. And our final main judgment in this area related to the council housing stock valuation exercise. This is a really big exercise that takes place periodically, and we have more detail of that in the body of this section. So if I turn to the next page, which is page 10 in the report here, in paragraph 20 onwards, this gives you an idea of the impact of the coronavirus on the preparation and the audit of the accounts, and the fact that we have taken advantage of the Act that was passed earlier in the year, such that we are reporting to you later than would normally be the case. Officers worked very hard to produce a set of draft accounts by the original deadline of 30th of June. We had to notify pretty early on that we would be struggling to complete our audit by the 30th of September. In due course, you can see there were quite a few adjustments to the accounts, and also the work on the housing stock valuation was expanded upon. So both teams worked closely together in order to reach this conclusion for this meeting today. And later on in that page, paragraph 24, an important aspect of local government reporting from a transparency perspective is that you bring the draft accounts into the public domain, and members of the public can lodge with me any objection to the accounts, and you'll be pleased to know there were no objections to the draft accounts for 1920. So I'm turning all the way on to the foot of page 11 of my papers here, and to Exhibit 3, and in line with international standards of auditing, I have to bring any significant findings to the attention of the members of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. And I've got 4 items I want to draw to your attention. The first one relates to the council housing stock revaluation. So a lot of work was underway before the accounts were prepared, but at the time of doing our audit work, there still had to be quite a bit progressed. So that took place in the currency of the audit. But you'll be pleased to hear we reached a satisfactory conclusion, and that's captured in the resolution side on the right-hand side. And it has also generated quite a few recommendations for taking forward. Item 2 on that table talks about the impact on the valuations of property, plant and equipment. So I've already referred to that. The valuer gave a caveat there about uncertainty to do with values. Officers captured that in the accounts, and we then echoed that in our audit opinion. With respect to common good funds, it was noted that some historic statutory adjustments that have been posted there are not appropriate. However, at the end of the day, this does not impact on the financial results of the council or the group, and we know that officers are going to look closely at this going forward. And the final item there relates to the judicial review on assets built on common good land now being deemed to be common good assets. I think you'll all be familiar with what is quite a long and complicated story in that regard. We've captured it both here and later on in the report, hopefully in a chronology that is familiar to you. Interestingly, for the purpose of the accounts, this had no implications for the accounts as these assets are treated as finance leases in the accounts of the council. We then go on in paragraph 32 onwards and continuing over the page, quite a few areas of adjustment that were required to the accounts, and in total adjustments of 9.1 million were posted. So you can see the extent to which officers and auditors worked closely together. And the next substantial section starts paragraph 43. This is to do with the management commentary, and we were wanting to ensure that it was balanced and that it was relevant for the year 1920. So some adjustments were made, but also officers took advantage of the relaxation allowed under the Coronavirus Act as to how much detail was required this year, and that is satisfactory. I'd like to point out in paragraph 46, we have reported that the council has made good progress in implementing a number of the prior year recommendations. So I'll go a little bit faster for the other sections. So that whole area was to support you as you reach a decision about approving the accounts later today. So the next section relates to financial management. It's part 2 and it starts on page 16 of my report. And quite a lot of narrative there about the budget arrangement that you have in place for identifying any funding gaps and how you work to address them. In the year 1920, you operated within budget, and in Exhibit 4 on page 17, we capture some of the substantial underspends that have contributed to arriving within budget at the end of the year. We also, from paragraph 52 onwards, have further narrative about your reserves. This is often a sign of the financial health of an organisation. And as you look forward to a pretty challenging time, managing your reserves will be very important in supporting your revenue spend. On page 18, paragraph 57 onwards, we're capturing the fact that the capital programme was not fulfilled as you might have intended. COVID having a more significant impact now in terms of the year 2021. So a summary of what was achieved last year. And then at the foot of that page in paragraph 62 onwards, a reminder that we've reported to this committee earlier in the year about your systems of internal control. So adequate overall, but also some recommendations for improvement for going forward. On page 19, paragraph 65 onwards, this gives you an idea about the level of review we carry out annually on your internal audit function to ensure that they comply with the appropriate standards. So I think you'll find there that we've give you positive assurance about the arrangements that you have in place, and we do place reliance on the work of internal audit. The one recommendation there relates to this new mandatory requirement for an external detailed review to be carried out of your department, and COVID had an implication there about the fulfilment of that. And it's from paragraph 68 onwards that we capture further narrative about the impact of that judicial review, what it means in terms from an accounting and legal perspective, and we know that officers have a lot to do going forward to ensure that's appropriate. And the final section of our financial management section relates to the arrangements you have for the standards of conduct and for the prevention and detection of fraud and error, and also your participation in the National Fraud Initiative, which takes place every 2 years. So part 3 starts on page 22 of my report, and this looks at financial sustainability. Now, I'm sure this is an area that is subject to much discussion now with the unplanned, unexpected impact of COVID-19 on everything that you do. So we have captured in paragraph 76 onwards the fact that already looking ahead, you've been looking at the impact on the year 2021, and in the next section, we're talking about the extent to which you'll be having to revisit your medium-term financial plans for the next 3 years. For the one that's extant at the time we wrote this, Exhibit 8 illustrates to you the level of the funding gap that you have to address going forward. We also make reference in paragraph 81 onwards about your established change programme, and whilst it has delivered savings, it's increasingly challenging to identify efficiencies by this stage. So there are 4 areas that you're exploring going forward in paragraph 82. So part 4 on page 24 looks at governance and transparency. And we were instructed through our planning guidance addendum to give some narrative here about how you managed with social distancing and having to remote workly. And I think you'll find that you've swiftly moved into new arrangements to support good governance and accountability there. And the final substantial section is part 5 on best value, a reminder about the importance of the best value regime for all local government bodies. And the 2 areas we focused in on this year was working with communities with respect to community empowerment and engagement. And the second best value characteristic we looked at in more detail related to fairness and equality. So there's a few areas we describe in more detail there, but also give an indication of those areas that could improve further. And there was one substantial recommendation which relates to having more detail in your equality impact assessments for them to be more effective. We were also struck by the percentage of staff who aren't keen to give their diversity details, and this is maybe something that you have to work upon to give them more confidence in sharing that. We have also given quite a bit of coverage here about performance management improvements, and this will be important for you to monitor yourselves, the service delivery, and that will be under challenge going forward, so you will be wanting to capture the data of what's being achieved. We have captured in our final paragraph 116 there what we consider to be a good practice arrangement you've had underway with your zero-based budgeting, and you've used that as a basis to help you reshape services. Excuse me. Appendix 1A is the particular area this committee will have an interest in going forward. These are the recommendations we've made at the conclusion of the 1920 audit. We're pleased to have had management responses, named individuals and due dates. So we too will be monitoring that, but I'm sure you'll be wanting to monitor that in year. And the other appendices relate to our follow-up of prior year recommendations, that's 1B, and then Appendix 2 is the follow-through from the risks that we identified during the planning stage. And our final section just highlights to you the national reports that Audit Scotland and the Accounts Commission have issued during the preceding year. So I'll stop there, Convener, at the conclusion of Appendix A. I'm very happy to take any questions, as is my colleague Rachel Brown, who's also participating in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Mr. Lorimer, is there anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, Convener. Maybe just a couple of points. The report here, and indeed the accounts which we're going to come on to, that's the culmination of many months of work. As Gillian has said, it reflects all of the activity of the council across a broad range of subjects, so not just our financial statements, but also governance, financial management, etc., as you've heard. So it is a very significant report in the calendar for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee, and indeed in terms of public confidence in the council's stewardship of public funds. And it's useful, I always think, to have an independent view of the council in key areas. And as Gillian has highlighted, there are some areas which have been recommended for improvement. We've accepted as officers all of those recommendations, and we'll be taking them forward. It has been a very challenging year to prepare and have audited a set of accounts. If I could beg the committee's indulgence just to pay tribute to my own team. They prepare the accounts along with many other duties. It's just one part of what the team does. But I think we also have relied very heavily on other council services and indeed our external audit team. So huge amount of work by a large number of people in order to get to the end point, which is in front of you today. We've all had to adapt to the remote working as part of that, but I think the investment that we've made in terms of agile working has really paid off in terms of getting that delivered. So I'll say no more other than that at the minute, convener. I do have a few comments, if I can, in terms of the actual accounts, the annual accounts themselves, which were an appendix to the report. But I'll stop there in case there's any questions on the auditor's report to members. Thank you.
Right, we dealt with your report, Chief Executive, in your report, and there was no questions on that. We then move on to the Audit Scotland report, which is the numbers at the top right hand of your screen, pages 7 to 14. Have we got any questions on pages 7 to 14? No questions on pages 7 to 14. Let's move. Sorry?
Councillor Miles has his hand up.
Okay. Well, I don't. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, fair enough. I just don't see Councillor Miles or his hand at the moment.
Yep, it's
Councillor
still.
Miles. Ah, right. Now I've got it. Right. Can you carry on, Councillor Miles?
Yes, it wasn't on page 7 to 14. First of all, a general comment, and then I've got a comment and a question later on at para 68, and I don't know which page that's on. But do you want that just now, or do you want it later?
Let's have that when we finish out all the questions, please. Comments after the questions.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's the standard practice, Councillor Miles.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions between pages 15 to 21? And I had some people asking me that before. Councillor Devine, you had a question that you asked me before on that area?
Yes, it's on page 18 of our papers, 12 on Gillian's papers. I note that you said that you're quite satisfied that there's no material misstatements being made here, but it's just a bit concerning that there have been quite a few errors made in this part. And I expect that it's got to do with the amount of work that people have had to deal with, but I would maybe like a little bit more explanation on this one, on housing, garages, things like that.
Gillian?
Yes, I'm happy to come in the first instance and then hand over to officers on this particular one. It was a really substantial exercise, and I think it's to do with the timing of all of the work, and also officers will be able to tell you more about it, but the valuer's own staff were on furlough at a point in time. So that's why it proved really challenging to conclude the process. So that really was taking place during the currency of the audit. So I'll hand over to officers at that point.
Okay, who's coming in on that?
Convener, if I can bring in Mr. Mill on that point, please.
That's fine, thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, there has been issues with the valuers. I wouldn't want to point to them, though. The valuers have been very good in reacting in previous years and in this year's this year under particularly difficult circumstances. So what I would point to would be, the valuation process. We go through a 5-year cycle of revaluations for all our assets. So each of our asset categories are looked at, on a once in every 5 years basis. So this is the year where we're looking at council dwellings, and I'd note generally our accounts have a huge number of assumptions within them. So it's our best estimate on those assumptions, and some of those are made by our valuers and some of those are made by accountants, etc. Now, one area that external audit chose to look at this year was in relation to how much we discount our housing valuations for their social housing use. So we'd used the same rate, which had been 57%. We'd used that for some time, following a previous assessment that had been made by a valuer. And we didn't ask the valuer as part of our valuation process for the 1920 accounts to look at that social housing discount element. So after liaison with the valuer, after the draft accounts were done, we determined that the discount factor, after external audit raising it, should be amended from 57% to 58%. And what that did was to increase the valuation of council house dwellings by 5.5 million on the balance sheet. Now, there are a few other items and they're set out on page 66, but that was by far the biggest result of the movement, that discount factor. So the learning point for us as officers is that given that each asset category is only looked at once every 5 years, we really need to prepare a procedure note for each of those so that when it comes round to the 5th year again, we'll actually recall all the aspects that we need to ask the valuer to address as part of that valuation process. And that didn't happen this year. So there was a couple of bits that we didn't pick up with the valuer for them to revisit around beacons and also the social housing discount. So our solution to that, yeah, there's a couple of bits we didn't ask the valuers about to clarify. Audits have raised those. They've resulted in changes in the valuation upwards for council dwellings. And our response to that is to prepare procedure notes so that when each category comes round, each of the 5 years, we've got clear instructions to go out to the valuers about what we require to be done.
Okay, Councillor Devine?
Yes, thanks. So what about the garages, Mr. Mill?
Yeah, that was one of, as I've said, that there was a number of aspects that we didn't ask the valuers to look at. So the garages were one element that the valuers were not asked to revisit, and for the draft accounts, and when the external auditors have raised that, we asked the valuers to look at it, and that's resulted in an increase in value of the garages.
Okay,
so
that's fine. Thank
each
you.
of the items that the external audit have raised have actually resulted in an increase in valuation of the council dwellings.
Okay, right, Councillor Duff, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think it's probably worth acknowledging the huge amount of work that's been done by both internal and external staff to deliver these on time, given the huge problems with COVID and remote working. I know as a director of Angus Alive, a big effort was made there to try and get their accounts ready in time to slot into the council's processes, and I think that was done. Yeah, my question really is on, well, I think it's page 19 or page 13, depending which one you want to check. I think it's
page 13 of Gillian's report. It's page 19 on our page.
I suspect it's a question for officers here. It's really just the technical thing about the non-statutory adjustments to common goods. Can we have an explanation what we're talking about here for non-accountants?
Will I go, convener? I'm not sure if Mr. Mill wants to come in. Yeah, so this is distinct from the judicial review. So I want to make sure that those things are seen separately, and we are going to look at them as one review. So the way that we've accounted for common good funds hasn't changed for a number of years. We did make changes to our common good accounting probably 7 or 8 years ago, perhaps, through a discussion with our external auditors at that time. And I think what's happened is our approach to that in terms of statutory adjustments. So the statutory adjustments that are made in the accounts in effect strip out the impact of proper accounting practice on the bottom line. So we make a number of adjustments in the council's accounts for that, and we've applied the same, I guess, approach and logic to the common good accounts. And what's been pointed out this year is, although as Gillian has said, it doesn't impact on the presentation or the audit of the accounts, there is a need to revisit that treatment and effectively discontinue the use of statutory adjustments. So we'll need to do that and work that through for the 2021 accounts. As the committee will be aware, and it's another recommendation in here in terms of the judicial review outcome, we need to look at our accounting policies and treatment for common good in any event. So we'll look at both of those things together in terms of 2021. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duff?
Yeah, are we talking here specifically about depreciation, Mr. Lorimer?
Yeah, Mr. Mills looking to come in, I think.
Yeah, quick call, Stephen?
Not specifically. This is about the use of the capital adjustment account and the non-ability to use that. We've not worked through it in detail, but what the general effect would be a presentation within common good funds of greater available balances, although in effect they wouldn't be all available because they come from the capital adjustment account, the removal of the capital adjustment account. Now, we introduced that a number of years to address the depreciation issue, and that was one of the reasons why we did not wish to make the change as well this year. In addition to what Ian said about the review that's required anyway in relation to common good, we didn't want to rush in and make this change until we're 100% sure it doesn't reintroduce the depreciation issue, which we removed 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks. I do now vaguely remember the issue 7 or 8 years ago, but thanks for that explanation. Thank you.
Councillor Braze, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, convener. I've two questions actually.
Please.
Page 18 and page 20.
Page 18, carry on, page 18.
Yes, I note with some alarm initially that we have had a discrepancy of 107 houses. And there's an explanation as to why, but I wonder if we could just have a wee bit more clarity on that, please.
Who's taking that one up?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. My colleagues may want to say a bit more. Yeah, really what's in the report there on page 18, Councillor Braze, is effectively the full story. The Angus Community Care Charitable Trust, as members will be aware, those properties have moved over now to the council. They weren't included in the initial list of properties. We just missed that. And I think there was another 37 new properties that hadn't been updated on the housing system. So again, there's something that we need to learn from that in terms of, I think we've captured it in the actions from the recommendation later in the report to make sure that we do a check with housing and their system at the year end to make sure that we don't miss any of those houses. So they were in our systems. They weren't on the accounting initially, and that's one of the issues that was picked up. But there isn't really much more to say other than that was the reason.
Yeah, so the 70 houses from ACCCT, it was merely a matter of timing then.
It was less of an issue of timing and more an issue of we missed them in terms of the original list because it had been a change that had been made. Yeah. Okay,
that's fine.
And page 20, Councillor Braze?
Yes, on page 20, we have adjustments of £9.1 million. Would we consider that to be a high figure or quite a reasonable figure?
It's 9.1 million more than I would want it to be. But it arises really from the changes that we've outlined. The valuation of the council's dwellings, our housing stock, is a very significant part of the balance sheet, as Mr. Mill has outlined, and a small change in the discount factor, the 57 to the 58, makes a significant difference, as does the addition of the houses and the garages that we've made. So the vast majority of that adjustment is really to do with those valuation issues that have been referenced earlier in the report. But my objective every year would be for there to be no audit adjustments at all.
Okay, Councillor Braze?
Yes, that's fine, and thanks for all your hard work as well.
Okay, right, there's nothing else on pages 15 to 21. Let's move on to part 2, which is pages 22 to 23. Anyone who want to come in on pages 22 to 23? Councillor Brace, could you put your hand down, please? Okay, if there's no one wanting to speak on 22 to 23, let's move on to part 3, which is pages 28 to 29. Sorry, can't it be that? 22 to 27. I think I'm getting slightly lost. Yes, 22 to 27 we're looking at now. Anyone in there? I had 1 or 2 people speak to me about things there. Councillor Devine? No?
Convener,
No, thanks, no.
Right, Councillor Duff, sorry.
yeah, I have to apologise. I'm now completely confused. But if I can quote the paragraph, would
Right.
that help?
Yes.
I had a question on paragraph 70, which it relates to the Community Empowerment Act and the public register.
I think that's a way further down yet, Councillor Duff.
No.
Sorry. Right, okay, fine, thank you. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, this is confusing when we don't have the same page numbers. Carry on, Councillor Duff.
Yeah, I just wanted, I mean, obviously that this was an action put on the council by the 2015 Act, compiling a register of common good assets. Now, this clearly has become more important or more urgent following the recent court judgment. I just wondered if we had a target for producing this list of common good assets, because it's clearly been an action on us for some time, and we haven't yet got there. So have we got a date there when we think we can get that completed? And I understand how complex it is, so yeah, I understand that.
Mr. Lorimer, not you?
Convener, I think Mrs. Buchanan probably wants to speak on that one.
Okay, fine, thank you. Mrs. Buchanan?
Thank you, Convener. We are looking at this within legal. The issue that we have at the moment, to be honest, is the fact that we're all working remotely and all the title deeds, of course, are held within the office. So logistically, we're putting together a process that allows us to look at the title deeds and to finalise what needs to be done in terms of determining what is common good and what is not. And we'll come back with a timescale in terms of that. And I can confirm that once we do that. We are looking at that at the moment. The work, unfortunately, as is the case with other streams of work, has been impacted by the COVID pandemic. But we are aware that there's a requirement to do that. There has been some work done on this already, so it's not as if some of it's not been covered off. But I'm getting an update on how much more needs done and how logistically we can then do that.
Okay, guys, enough?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Lorimer, you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just to say, in terms of the action plan, that's one of the actions that's later on in the report, which Gillian Woolman mentioned. We've committed to bring a report to council by the end of March on the kind of plans and steps that we and timescales indeed for the work as Mrs. Buchanan has just outlined. So we will bring a report having done that further work. But as has been pointed out, we are somewhat restricted in terms of our ability to do some of that just because of current working arrangements. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, on page 25, first of all, I'd like to pay tribute to all the hard work done by both auditors and the finance team in this very difficult time. Tremendously difficult to do all that, and a huge amount of work being done. So well done all, and this committee should recognise that. But on page 25, paragraph 68, it's recognised. I'd like to ask Gillian this. You recognise the wide-ranging impact of this judicial review on common good funds. Now, recognising Angus didn't challenge it due to the financial implications, but this may be challenged by other councils across Scotland because it does have, you say, wide-ranging impact. If it is challenged and it may be overturned, what is your opinion? Is this liable to be challenged by other councils, and is it liable to be overturned because of the huge impact it will have?
So I'm happy to speak first, but officers might have more up-to-date position across the local government sector. I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that ultimately the balance of the judicial decision that was forthcoming came as a surprise to us too. So I know that the Director of Finance will have been sharing this more widely with the network of key officers across Scotland. I'm not up to date as to whether other councils will now be taking any legal action in this regard. We haven't had a chance to start our 2021 planning yet, but we will be very engaged and very interested, the Accounts Commission as a whole, because we do recognise this has significant implications going forward. So I'll just pause at that. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay, fine. Councillor Whiteside, I saw you had your hand up and you took it down. Was that intentional?
Yes, I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Duff, so it's been asked and answered. Thank you.
Right. We now move on to, where are we? We're on page 25 at the moment. Yes, we move on to part 3, which is pages 28 and 29. Any comments, any questions on part 3, pages 28 to 29? Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I think I've got my page numbering right. My question links into page 34 as well. So can I just combine them up, please?
On you go.
Gillian, thank you very much. I always find your summary really helpful, and you're very listenable to, and I really appreciate all the work that goes into these reports from everyone involved. I was particularly pleased to see you pick up on the equality impact assessments and they include the equalities data. It does concern me that there seems to be such a gap in terms of practice around the impact assessments, because they've been a duty that we've had to do for some considerable time. And I wondered if this is a national issue. And I wondered,
Bell, can you, before you continue, can you give me a paragraph number?
Oh, sorry, it's recommendations 11 and 12.
We're nowhere near recommendations 11 and 12 yet.
Well, it was page 20. It was page 34 on my combined copy and page 28 on Gillian's report.
We're talking about pages 28 and 29 of the our number, the council's numbering, not Gillian's numbering.
Oh, well, there you go. Right. Okay.
Please stick with the council's numbering in the top right-hand corner of your screens. Otherwise, everybody's going to get 100% confused. Is there anybody got anything on pages 28 and 29? If not, let's move on to part 4, which is pages 30 to 31 on the council's numbering.
Okay.
Anybody got anything on part 4? No. Let's move on to part 5, which is pages 32 to 36 on the council's numbering. Anyone got anything there? I had some people who came along earlier and asked me questions there.
Yep.
I think you were on page 34 of that, Councillor Bell.
Yep. Is that okay? Right, thank you very much. Hopefully Gillian remembers some of that, so I don't have to go over it again. Yeah, so I was asking about, in terms of the equality impact assessment, is this a national issue? Because it does concern me that there's such a variety in terms of content for our impact assessments. And also on recommendation 12, the disability pay gap is very concerning. Likewise, only 12% of our staff have actually chosen to reveal whether they have a disability or not. And of that 12%, I guess that includes nil returns. So that gap could be worse or could be better. What are the barriers to people filling in that information? Is it a concern around being thought not good enough for their job? What is it really that we need to do to address that? And I'm also concerned that the timescales are quite tight for the actions on that. And I know it's really, really important work. But given everything that's going on, do we have capacity to deliver on these, and what needs to be done to free people up to deliver on this to the timescales? I was really quite concerned about the disability pay gap aspect there, particularly.
Yes, so I'm happy to respond to those questions. So this was us looking at one of the best value characteristics in more detail this year, and we have to look at fairness and equality at least once during the audit appointment period, which is 5 years across all councils in Scotland. We regularly report that equality impact assessments don't have the complete detail necessary in order to be effective. So both in terms of the granularity of the detail of the mitigating actions, and then the follow through of what it means from a policy perspective. So Angus is not alone in us making a recommendation that you need to strengthen the process of equality impact assessments for it to have the desired objective at the end of the day. In terms of the disclosures, so seeking your staff to complete diversity data, staff, in Audit Scotland, we've had a similar journey. And so there was quite an engagement strategy put underway to give people confidence about the confidentiality with which all of those records are maintained. But also, it seems to be pretty automatic now for new starts to fill in that information. But if you've never taken the opportunity to go back to everyone who's a long-established member of staff, you might be missing their information, and it might be worthwhile doing a one-off exercise in order to capture all of that. And if Angus Council is in step with the normal reporting pattern for listed authorities in Scotland, April 2021 is a very important date. That will be the anniversary of when you should be publishing your mainstreaming equalities report and reporting on the progress of your equality outcomes. And April 2021 is also the opportunity for the refresh of your equality outcomes, and that only happens every 4 years. So we hope that by putting a spotlight on this area, that gives you some motivation to take forward those areas. But it's not an easy area, and equality outcomes, you're only required to refresh them every 4 years. There's recognition that it takes time for things to change. And if your diversity data is showing you results such as pay gaps, that's the basis then for setting your new equality outcomes. What do you want to achieve going forward in narrowing those gaps? So that's what I would offer at this stage.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay, Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It's paragraph 93, which is bottom of page 26 in the Audit Scotland report. It's about participatory budgeting and the comment that in the last financial year we've achieved a 0.1% on PB, whereas the government target is 1%. Now, clearly, we're going to have to accelerate what we're doing there. I just wonder how well prepared we are to make that tenfold jump in how much of our budget we allocate by participatory budgeting.
Anyone wish to take that one up? Mr. Lorimer?
I was just trying to unmute myself there, convener. Thank you. Yeah, it is a challenge. What we've done in 1920 is really what they call a small grants-based approach. So we had a relatively small sum of money to allocate across the different localities of Angus. That was subject to widespread engagement and discussion. Some of the progress of that's been impacted by the pandemic in the current calendar year. Of course, there's still an intention to deliver on all of that. But there is plans to effectively move on to what's called the mainstreaming of participatory budgeting, because in reality, the pots of money which are over and above our budget are simply not affordable. So it's about ensuring there is public participation in the other budget decisions that the council makes, and the plans around that are reasonably well developed. We actually had a discussion at the council leadership team, I think it was last week, around this particular area and how we develop it. The 1% target is that. We think that we shouldn't regard that as a ceiling. We should be seeking to ensure there's participation wherever we can, and where it's it delivers the outcomes that the council wants to achieve. So a bit of a challenge. We need to move from small grants to mainstreaming, but there are plans as to how we would get there. Those plans have been disrupted by the pandemic. I would have to say we're not as far ahead as we would have wanted to be, but it's still very much on our list and on our radar. Thank you, convener.
Okay, Councillor Duff.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder when do you think we will get to 1%?
I don't think it would be. I can't commit to a timescale. We do have the statutory timescale, which is 2021, or by the end of 2021, I think it is. We have that in mind in terms of delivery, but there's a fair bit of change would be needed in terms of how we would do that. But I know that colleagues in the Communities Directorate do have a number of plans and proposals as to how that would be delivered.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, convener. Councillor Bell and I basically had the same queries, and thank you to Gillian for your answer. And if I cover anything here that Councillor Bell and your response, and particularly your response, I had connection issues with my headset, so I maybe missed the end part of it. But it was more looking at, so obviously thank you for the answer to Councillor Bell's questions. It was more to look at the practicalities of the EMR data on 101, 100 on page 34 or page 28, whatever we're doing, and about how the council staff chose to disclose whether they had a disability or not. And it was the or not part of that sort of pricked my attention. I can't ever recall seeing anything that we would have necessarily gotten that would, as councillors, that we would be revealing whether or not we had a disability. And I know we're not technically employees, but at what stage would someone actually be, is it a case that people are choosing not to reveal they had a disability? Or is it a case they've not had an opportunity to reveal they've not had a disability? Or is it a case that we think that people are choosing not to disclose they have a disability because they're fearful? And I know that's mentioned in the report, they're fearful of the possible ramifications of that. Because it's the thing is, if I guess that most folk who don't have a disability would maybe just ignore the question. I just wondered if the practicalities around that, if that's one of the issues that we've maybe got here as well.
So I'm happy to respond to that. We'll have picked this up from your reporting that's taken place in recent times. I would hope that our finding is a trigger to go back to look at the forms that people complete, either on joining the organisation or any annual update to your HR system. So HR systems have changed a lot over years, and in Audit Scotland we would have a separate page of our private records to update that if we have any protected characteristics we would like to record. And we also, the emphasis has changed, certainly for us as a listed authority. There was a lot of push for a lot of narrative or disclosure, or for people, and then there was a sense of no, ease off. But actually at the same time people became more confident about recording it, recognising management can only make policies based on the information that they have available and knowing that it's treated very carefully. So if your diversity report's got good engagement with the wider staff cohort, that might be helpful in encouraging people to share the information. We just picked this up from your reports. We haven't invested time looking at the mechanics of what you have in place, but I do hope this is a trigger that somebody will going forward.
Hey, Mr. Lorimer.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Mrs. Faulkner might want to come in on this, but just to flag, we intend to try and address this pretty much immediately. So within the action plan later in the report, there's a commitment to try and encourage staff to explain what the purpose of it is through the staff engagement sessions that we have during December, and then to try and encourage more participation in that. But I'm conscious I'm speaking to an action that Mrs. Faulkner has agreed to undertake, so she may wish to say a bit more about that one.
Mrs. Faulkner.
Yes, I'm happy to do that, convener. Yes, indeed, Mr. Lorimer is correct. We do have action underway to engage with our staff, and particularly through the staff engagement events that are coming up. We do ask people, as been indicated, when they join the organisation, to disclose their protected characteristics. But we are aware that we require to update that information as often as we possibly can. So we will be undertaking an exercise to engage with staff and to ask them again to give us further information on that over the next couple of months. If I can also just say on the EIAs, we are doing training sessions. We have 2 dates set aside in December, on the 8th and the 12th of December, to take that forward so that we can educate our staff even more on how to complete EIAs and make them as full and as useful as possible.
Okay, are you satisfied with that, Mr. MacDonald, Councillor MacDonald? Okay, right, you take your hand down. Is there anything else on part 5, pages 32 to 36? Okay, if not, can we move on to appendix 1B, 1A, which is the list of recommendations to be carried out, and it appears on pages 37 to 41. Anyone got any questions or comments on appendix 1A? Okay, if there's nothing there, let's move on to appendix 1B, which appears to be pages 42 to 47. Has anyone got anything on appendix 1B? No?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, I'm missing the hands there, just moving too quickly. Councillor Devine.
Thanks. On page 44, it's the voluntary severance thing. I was just wondering why, when the government has looked at a maximum of 2 years, the council is going for a maximum period of 2.5 years for maximum payback. Why are we just not going for 2? And can I ask my other one on page 45?
Carry on.
This is on PY9 performance reporting. I mean, I know, and you've noted that there's been an improvement in performance reporting, but at the last full council meeting, we had 3 extraordinary long reports. And I think everyone would really appreciate it if we had executive summaries, mainly to show us how the council is performing against targets. Therefore, we need a bit more clarity around the targets. And I'm under no illusion how difficult and complicated this will be, because given the complexity of the services that the council provides, but we need to see more or less at a glance how we are performing against targets. I don't know how it works, how good is our council. I'm more aware of how good is our school. And in that, only a few areas need to be looked at per annum. And so that at least means that you don't have to do targets for absolutely everything. I'm just wondering if this is possible to do, and are we looking at other councils' reporting methods rather than reinvent the wheel?
Right, who wants to take that one?
Vera, I can possibly take the second question if that's...
I'd rather we do it in order. Somebody take the voluntary severance one first.
I can take that, convener. The voluntary severance policy that we currently have has a 3-year payback period. So we have gone with reducing that to 2.5 years. It was actually formerly 5 years payback period. We reduced that to 3 years, and we're now reducing it to 2.5. You know, and certainly Mr. Lorimer and myself have discussed that, and that was felt to be the best way forward at this stage.
If I can possibly add to that, convener. So it is about a payback period. Our thinking on it was that 2 years might be too short a period, depending on what severance costs are involved. We're mindful of the difficult financial challenges that we have, and we felt that a 2.5-year payback period would give us a bit more flexibility while still also making sure that we deliver value for money and protect the public pound.
Okay, Councillor Devine, are you happy with that and voluntary severance?
Yes, that'll do fine.
Okay, and now can we go on to the performance reporting? I think that was you coming in there, Mr. Lorimer.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yeah, there's, I think the points that Councillor Devine has made are well made. This is something that we have firmly on our radar, particularly around our performance-led council programme, which is referenced elsewhere in the reports. As an accountant, I like the idea of targets and then reporting against those targets. So that works for me. And I think we've agreed there's actually a couple of actions, one from last year's audit and a kind of new one for this year's audit, which we're committing to look at that. That will be a joint piece of work between the two areas of the council that look after that. So very much take on board those points, which will reflect in terms of our future reporting, and we'll look to capture that in future accounts as part of our management commentary. But there is a very significant piece of work being done, a performance-led programme, which we hope to be able to report on progress of. Again, that's something else that's been impacted by the pandemic this year, but we've got a very clear plan as to what we want to do there. It's about using performance, it's about self-evaluation to know where we are now, where we need to go, and how we're going to get there. So there's a very detailed programme, as I say, as to how we will deliver on that, but take on board the points that Councillor Devine makes about clarity of targets, and I would call it maybe the simplification of the reporting of performance against those targets. So happy to take that on board. Thank you.
Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to hear that, because we really do need to have a bit more clarity at the beginning of our report, when they're 40 pages long, some of these reports, and while they're really interesting to read, it would make it a very much easier thing for us to scrutinise, I think. Thank you.
Fine. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It was really just a comment on page 44, I think, PY7 public scrutiny. Certainly within the SNP group, we normally, as you know yourself, we review the papers the day before. And I think, one, we try and encourage all our members to make a contribution, and also that obviously if we do sort of rehearsing the questions, we do reduce any duplication. I think that's helpful. And I think we do treat it pretty seriously that we contribute to scrutiny and audit.
Thank you. Anything else on section 1B? If not, can we move on to appendix 2, which is pages 48 to 50, which is the significant audit risks identified during planning. Anyone got any questions on that area? Okay, if not, let's move on to item 3, which is the summary of national performance reports. Anyone got any questions on that one? No. Right, let's keep on moving on. Starting on page 53, we have the Audit Scotland comments on the audit of the 2019-20 annual accounts. The first part of the report is pages 52, 3 and 54. Anything on pages 53 and 54? No.
So, convener, I'll just come in at this point. This is in fact our cover letter to you that might normally precede the annual audit report we've just gone through. So I have covered the content of this report largely, but I want to point out paragraph 7, which is at the foot of that first page of Appendix B, and it's just saying, in presenting this report to the Scrutiny and Audit Committee, we seek confirmation from those charged with governance of any instances of any actual suspected or alleged fraud, any subsequent events that have occurred since the date of the financial statements, or any material non-compliance that should be brought to our attention. So normally through our interaction with officers and also through our attending at this committee, including post-year end, that will have been your opportunity to draw anything to our attention. But I am saying, if you feel there's anything else that has not been brought to our attention, this is the moment to mention it to us.
I think I have confidence in my colleagues that anything like that that comes up would have been long since reported to the appropriate officer and been brought up with you during the audit.
Perfect. Thank you, convener.
Okay, right.
And our last section there refers to the fact that we get a letter of representation from the Section 95 officer. And the following page, convener, that sets out, this is the actual wording of my audit opinion that is inserted in your annual report and accounts. And that is a clean audit opinion. And the opinion extends beyond the financial results and also relates to all of the narrative that you have, whether in the management commentary and the annual governance statement. That's all really important because there's a big debate in England at the moment about the content of the accounts. But in Scotland, because of Scottish regulations, you have detailed management commentary. I report on it, and hopefully in partnership, we ensure a good quality narrative at the front end of your accounts. So that is a clean audit opinion that will be inserted in your accounts. And the final item there is the letter of representation, which we look forward to receiving the signed version in due course at the conclusion of today. Thank you, convener. Happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Braze has already got his hand up, so I'm just a way to ask him to come in.
Yes, thanks, convener. My question isn't really about, it's about Beacon that appears right the way through the papers, or most of them. Could you maybe give me a bit of information? I'm wondering, is Beacon a piece of software that you subscribe to, or is it just a system that you've devised yourselves?
I think that's one for the officers.
I'm happy to respond. Yeah, well, I'm happy to respond in the first instance and hand over to officers.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the valuation of council housing stock, the valuer is guided by the selection of a beacon, a representative house, that he can then extrapolate the results for similar houses. So it's the valuer uses it, it's in accordance with the EUV social housing basis for the valuation of social housing. We do come across it elsewhere, but the beacon is just, it's an exemplar house that they can then extrapolate the valuation of the whole portfolio. So I can pass over to officers who may have more detail about that.
Anyone wish to come in on that? Was that you saying you would come in, Mr. Mill?
Yeah, it's just to agree with what Gillian said there. It's we don't go out and ask the valuer to value all our thousands of council dwellings that would be unaffordable, the bill that we would receive. So a pragmatic approach is taken where representative samples are taken, examples of council dwellings are taken, and then those extrapolated over the whole housing stock. And I think we've actually got more beacons though than we actually, have classes of rental property. So, we've only got a handful of rental property types, but we actually have 29, 30 beacons, I think, over the council area.
Right, that's fine. And but this is something the Angus Council, we provide the beacons for the valuers to value.
What we agree with the valuer, what's an appropriate representative sample. So whether that be a single person flat, whether that be a 4-bedroom house, we agree with them based on the profile of the housing stock within Angus, what would be a representative number in order for them to give a coverage of valuation across Angus. And that may vary from council to council. Different councils have different numbers of beacons dependent on the nature of their housing stock. Could be more, could be less. I think we're generally at the higher end of the number of beacons that we have compared to other local authorities.
Can I come in there and just ask Mr. Mill, is that symptomatic of having 8 boroughs which came together, all of which had their own separate council housing programmes in the 1960s, 70s?
Yes, agreed. Our borough nature means that we have a higher number of beacons, yes, whereas maybe city-based ones would have a lower number. I don't know, for example, if Dundee do theirs by the various areas of Dundee, where they just take an approach across the whole city for types, 4-bedroom houses, single-person flats, whatever. But yeah, certainly our nature of being borough-based influences that. But yeah, we're going to actually undertake a review of the number of beacons for the future to see if we can narrow those down and whether we have too much. It would make the work for the valuer a lot easier.
Okay, Councillor Braze?
Yes, that's fine. That helps me a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councillor Miles?
Yes, just a comment. First of all, to thank Gillian very much for her comments and the assurance that our finance team have made a tremendous job in this very difficult circumstances. And it's very heartening to get this kind of confirmation from an outside source. So thank you very much for that, Gillian. Thank you, and thanks to our finance team for doing that.
Okay, can we get back to what we were dealing with? We were on Appendix A, which is pages 55 to 57. Anybody got any comments on that? Move to Appendix B, which is on pages 58 to 59 and applies to the charitable trust. Anyone got any comments on that? Appendix C is the William Strang mortification on pages 60 to 61. Anyone got any comments on that? And finally, Appendix D, the letter of representation, which will be signed. Has anyone got any comments on that?
No.
Okay, on that basis, do we agree just a minute, let me go back to the start. On report 291/20, we're asked to review the content of Audit Scotland's annual report. We've done that. Scrutinise and approve the accounts for Angus Council, Robert and William Strang mortification, and the Angus Council Charitable Trust. We're coming to that. Note the summary of the main movements of annual council in the attached Appendix C, and note the key messages. Right, we're in a situation where we can now take away report 291/20 and put up the email that you got today in terms of the annual accounts. And I'm just trying to find that, and I'm going to have to come out and go into my emails to get it. Just a second. Right. I have the annual accounts in front of me. I hope some of the rest of you do. Mr. Lorimer, while they're getting there, do you want to say anything on the annual accounts?
Yes, please. Thank you, convener. So the accounts that you have there, we've actually got 3 sets of accounts to ask the committee to authorise for signature. So there's the council's accounts, as you say, convener. There's then the Angus Council Charitable Trust accounts and the Strang Mortification accounts. But if I focus first of all on the council's annual accounts, there's 131 pages to those, so it is a very significant set of papers. Those are now complete on an audited basis, so they're ready to be signed off, subject to the committee's agreement of that. The accounts contain a huge amount of detail, and I'm not going to attempt to summarise those in any way, but the management commentary, which we've spoken about a couple of times during the course of the meeting, that's at the beginning of the accounts, and that's really quite an important document in terms of providing a non-technical summary, if I could call it that, to the council's finances, its performance, strategies, and future challenges, and all of that sort of thing. So it's a good way of trying to summarise the key things. One thing to reassure members about: this committee received the draft accounts at the August meeting. There are a handful of changes that have been made since those draft accounts. Appendix C to the covering report, which is right at the very end of the papers, gives a bit more detail on what those changes have been. So that picks up the issues on housing valuations, as we've talked about. So I'd like to reassure the committee that the changes that have been made are effectively covered or summarised in Appendix C. There have been some wording changes to the management commentary for the performance things that we've spoken about. And we've also taken the opportunity to update the governance statement compared to the draft accounts to note the outcome from the former Lochside Leisure Centre court case, which has obviously come subsequent to those draft accounts. So although it's a lot of 130 odd pages, there are only a handful of changes relative to in terms of things that are kind of key relative to the draft that the committee saw in August. So as I say, they're ready now to be authorised for signature, providing the committee is happy for that to happen across all 3 of those sets of accounts. Thank you, convener.
Okay, on the basis that we have already had this before us in August, and we've been reminded of what the various bits are, although few of us will have had a chance to look at them, does anybody have any questions on any of the annual reports? If not, are we agreed that they should be signed off, considering that we've seen the drafts before?
Agreed.
Agreed. Right, so basically, let me go back to the recommendations. We reviewed the contents, that's item 1. We've scrutinised and approved for signature the Angus Council, Robert and William Strang Mortification, and Angus Council Charitable Trust. We've noted the main movements, we've noted the key messages. Are we agreed those recommendations for scrutiny and audit? Agreed. Thank you very much. It's been difficult without adequate numbering. We've managed to get through it, and thank you for your forbearance.
Thank you, convener.
Close the meeting. And I can get my